You think you know someone, but then life throws a curveball you never saw coming. Nathan Reed, CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the world, stood at the glass window of his office, gazing out at the city. His thoughts were a whirlwind of decisions, mergers, and deadlines, each one more pressing than the last. Yet, in the midst of his controlled chaos, his phone rang. It was a call he wasn't expecting. "Mr. Reed, we have an urgent situation at Mercy Hospital. It's about Emily Brooks." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Emily Brooks, his ex-wife. 6 months had passed since their divorce, a cold and calculated end to a marriage that once seemed full of promise. He thought he had moved on, but hearing her name again twisted something deep inside him. "Sir, she's listed you as the father of her child." Nathan froze. His mind raced. He tried to process what he was hearing, but it felt like his whole world was shifting beneath his feet. His thoughts went back to the final days of their marriage, the arguments, the silence, the emotional distance that had slowly crept in. Emily had left him, and he hadn't fought it. He had accepted it, even welcomed the freedom. But a child? A child that was his? This was not part of the plan. This was not what he expected. After everything, after 6 months, why now? "I'm coming," he finally managed to say, his voice tight with disbelief. His grip on the phone tightened as the weight of the news settled in. The ride to the hospital was a blur. His mind kept replaying the conversation, the possibilities, the questions he needed answers to. He wasn't sure how he felt. Anger? Confusion? Guilt? Or maybe all of the above. He entered the hospital, his mind still racing. Every step he took felt heavy, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. He was a billionaire, a man used to control, used to having all the answers. But standing in front of a hospital room door, he was anything but in control. He knocked softly, then opened it. Inside, Emily lay on the bed, pale and exhausted, with an IV drip in her arm. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of surprise. And something else, something unreadable. "Nathan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He could see the pain in her eyes, but there was something else, too. A flicker of hope? A desire for answers? He didn't know. He couldn't read her anymore. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice breaking. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to react. He could feel the walls closing in on him, but he had no choice now. The past was here, and it was staring him in the face. "I just wanted to know the truth," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Emily reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. But now you know. He's yours, Nathan." Nathan sat down beside Emily's bed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The sterile smell of the hospital room seemed to suffocate him as he tried to wrap his mind around everything. A child. His child. 6 months after the divorce, and here he was, back in her life, facing a truth he never expected. Emily's gaze was steady, but her eyes held a vulnerability he hadn't seen in a long time. It was the same look she had when they first met, a mixture of hope and uncertainty. But now, there was something else in her eyes, guilt, maybe, or fear. Fear of what he would do with this new information. Fear of the consequences. Nathan didn't know what to say. His mind was a mess of questions. Why hadn't she told him sooner? Why now? Was this some sort of last-minute plea for him to come back into her life? He couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. He thought he'd left all of this behind. But now, here it was, back in his face. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice sounding more detached than he felt. Emily bit her lip, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the hospital blanket. "A few weeks," she said quietly. "I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought it was better if I handled it on my own." Nathan exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing thoughts. A few weeks? She had kept this from him for weeks? The anger bubbled up in him, but he quickly pushed it down. He couldn't let his emotions take over now. There were too many things to figure out. "So what now?" he asked, his voice softer this time, almost like he was talking to himself more than to her. Emily looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know, Nathan. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you might reject him, or worse me." The vulnerability in her voice tugged at something deep within him, a part of him he didn't want to acknowledge. He was angry, yes, but there was something else there too. Something unfamiliar, something that felt like responsibility. "I'm not going to reject him," Nathan said, his voice low but firm. I just I need to process this. I need time. Emily nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. I understand, she whispered. I never wanted to put you in this position. Nathan reached over and gently took her hand, surprising himself with the gesture. He had spent so many years keeping his emotions locked away, focused solely on his career, that it felt strange to even be here, to be having this conversation. But there was no going back now. Let's take it one step at a time, he said, his voice softening. We'll figure this out. For him. Emily squeezed his hand, the first genuine smile he had seen from her in months crossing her face. Thank you, she whispered. Nathan nodded, still lost in his own thoughts. What had just happened? His life, the one he had worked so hard to build, was suddenly different. And yet, as he looked at Emily, sitting there in that hospital room, something inside him shifted. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new. Nathan sat in his office the next day, staring at the city skyline through the massive glass windows. His thoughts were a whirlwind. The conversation with Emily replayed in his mind over and over again. He had tried to convince himself that everything was fine, that he was in control. But now he wasn't so sure. A child. His child. The reality of it was starting to settle in, and it made him uncomfortable. He was used to being in charge, running a multi-billion-dollar company with an iron fist. But fatherhood? That was something entirely different. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, trying to focus. His assistant, Sarah, knocked lightly before entering. Mr. Reed, there's someone here to see you. A Miss Walker, Emily's lawyer. Nathan sighed and rubbed his temples. Send her in. He wasn't sure what to expect. It had only been a day since Emily had told him about the baby, and now here was someone representing her, probably to make sure he didn't back out. Sarah stepped aside, and a woman in her late 30s walked in. She was dressed sharply, her presence commanding yet professional. Mr. Reed, thank you for seeing me on such short notice. Her voice was calm but firm, making it clear she was no stranger to high-pressure situations. Nathan nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. Of course, Miss Walker. What can I do for you? She sat down, opening her briefcase and pulling out a file. I represent Emily Brooks, she began, and I'm here to discuss your legal responsibilities regarding her child. Nathan's stomach tightened. I didn't expect this to go through lawyers. It's standard procedure, she replied, not looking up from her papers. Emily is requesting your acknowledgement of paternity, and of course, your involvement in the child's life. We'll need you to sign some documents, but first, we need to discuss the specifics. Nathan leaned back in his chair, trying to remain calm. I'm not sure what you expect from me. I just found out yesterday, and I need time to process this. Miss Walker looked up at him, her expression softening for a moment. I understand this is unexpected, Mr. Reed. Emily never wanted to force your hand, but the child deserves to know who his father is. Nathan stared at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He wasn't just a businessman. He was a father now, a responsibility that he hadn't asked for, but one that was thrust upon him all the same. What does Emily want from me exactly? He asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Miss Walker paused, looking at him intently. She wants you to be a father to your son, Mr. Reed. She wants your involvement, even if it's just financially at first. Nathan clenched his jaw. And what about me? What if I'm not ready for this? What if I'm not the kind of father he needs? The lawyer's eyes softened. That's something only you can figure out. But I believe you're a good man, Mr. Reed. And your son deserves the chance to know you. Nathan looked out the window again, the city sprawling before him. The decision wasn't just about him anymore. It was about his son. And for the first time, he felt a sense of responsibility that had always been foreign to him. He wasn't sure if he was ready for it, but he knew he couldn't ignore it either. I'll sign the documents, he said finally, his voice steady. Miss Walker nodded. I'll have them sent over immediately. As she left his office, Nathan sat back in his chair, staring at the city below. The future seemed uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had a new role to play. And whether he was ready or not, he would rise to meet it. Nathan arrived at Mercy Hospital the next day, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had spent the night thinking about what was to come, about the child, about Emily, and about what his next steps should be. The hospital lobby was bright, sterile, and far too quiet. It felt nothing like the world he was used to, the fast-paced, high-stakes environment where everything was clear, where he had control. But here, in the sterile calm of the hospital, He was out of his element. He didn't belong. A nurse led him down the hallway to the room where Emily was recovering. His heart raced, and he couldn't help but wonder what he was about to face. When he walked in, Emily was sitting up in bed, looking exhausted but alert. She smiled weakly as she saw him. "Hey," she said softly, her voice hoarse. Nathan nodded, unsure of what to say. He had never been good with emotions. He was the kind of man who dealt in facts, not feelings. In this situation, it was filled with nothing but feelings. "How are you?" he asked, his voice sounding hollow even to him. "I'm okay. Tired, but okay." Emily looked up at him, her eyes full of a quiet intensity. "I'm sorry, Nathan," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Nathan exhaled slowly, sitting down at the edge of the bed. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice strained. "I never expected this. Never thought I'd be here, in this situation." Emily bit her lip, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "I know," she whispered. "I didn't want to drag you into it. I didn't want him to grow up without knowing who his father was." Nathan glanced at the baby in the bassinet beside the bed. His heart skipped a beat as he looked at the tiny form, the child who had just turned his world upside down. "I don't know what kind of father I'll be," he said quietly. "I don't even know if I'm ready for this." Emily reached out and took his hand, her grip light but firm. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't even have to be perfect. He just needs to know you care." Nathan stared at her, his mind racing. The responsibility of fatherhood was a heavy weight, but Emily was right. He couldn't just walk away. Not from the child, and not from Emily. Not now. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'll do what I can. For him." Emily's smile, though faint, was genuine. "That's all I'm asking." As Nathan sat there, his eyes still on the baby, something inside him shifted. He wasn't sure what the future held, or if he was even capable of being the father this child needed. But he couldn't run away. Not from this. Not from his son. Nathan spent the next few days and a days trying to process everything. He had agreed to be part of this child's life, but he didn't quite know what that meant. He wasn't prepared to be a father, and certainly not one to a baby he had never known existed until a few days ago. He was used to making decisions that had clear outcomes, numbers, projections. But this was entirely different. One morning, he sat at his kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers, but his mind wasn't on the spreadsheets. It kept drifting back to the baby, to Emily. The baby was his son. He had no doubt about that anymore. But the thought of taking on the responsibility, being there for him, it felt overwhelming. "What do I even do now?" he muttered to himself. He hadn't told anyone about the baby yet. His colleagues at the company had no idea what was going on, and neither did his friends. He had barely told his assistant, Sarah, anything. She had noticed the change in him, but Nathan didn't know how to explain it. He didn't even understand it himself. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Emily. "How's everything going?" it read. Nathan stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. What was he supposed to say? That he was trying to figure out how to be a father? That he felt like he was drowning in responsibilities? He didn't want to burden her with his doubts. After a moment, he typed a quick response. "I'm doing okay. Just figuring things out." He hit send and leaned back in his chair. The truth was, he was far from okay. But he didn't know how to explain that to her. As the day went on, he found himself pacing his apartment, restlessly thinking about the future. His company was still his priority, but now there was this new life that depended on him. He didn't want to fail this child. He didn't want to fail Emily. His phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Sarah. "Nathan, I just wanted to check in," she said when he answered. "You've been a little off lately. Is everything okay?" Nathan paused. It felt strange to admit it, but he knew Sarah could tell something was wrong. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile into his voice. "Just a lot on my plate. I'll be fine." Sarah didn't sound convinced. "All right, but don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." Nathan hung up, his thoughts racing. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't run from it. He had to face it, and he had to do it now, for his son. Nathan arrived at Emily's apartment later that evening, his mind still spinning from the conversation with Sarah and the pressure building inside him. It had been days since he'd promised to be a part of this child's life, but the reality of it all was settling in like a heavy weight on his chest. He stood outside her door for a moment, taking a deep breath before knocking. When Emily opened the door, she gave him a small, tentative smile. "Hey," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Nathan nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Hey," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but he knew he had to face the reality of the situation. Emily led him to the small living room, where the faint smell of baby lotion and diapers filled the air. A few toys were scattered around the floor, a sign of the life that had been so unexpectedly thrust into his own. "How are you doing?" Emily asked as she sat down on the couch, her gaze fixed on him. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, unsure how to put everything he was feeling into words. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice quieter than usual. "This is a lot to take in. I thought I had everything under control, but now, I'm not so sure." Emily's eyes softened, and she looked away for a moment, as if processing his words. "I know it's a lot. I never wanted to complicate your life, Nathan. But he's your son, and I need you to be a part of his life. I can't do this alone." Nathan's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had never imagined himself in this position, having a child, being part of someone's life like this. He had been so focused on his work, on his career, that the thought of fatherhood had never seemed real. But now, standing here with Emily, it was undeniable. This child was his, and he had a responsibility. "I want to be there," he said slowly, the words coming out more naturally than he expected. "I don't know exactly how to do it yet, but I'll figure it out." "For him." Emily nodded, relief washing over her face. "That's all I need to hear, Nathan." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Nathan looked around the room, his gaze landing on the small crib in the corner. His son was out there, asleep, completely unaware of the internal struggle he was causing. "I'm not perfect, Emily. I don't know what kind of father I'll be," Nathan said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I'm going to try. I'm going to give this everything I've got." Emily's smile was soft but genuine. "That's all anyone can do," she said quietly. Nathan felt a glimmer of hope, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe he wasn't ready for this, but he was willing to try. And maybe that was enough. Nathan sat in his car outside Emily's apartment, staring at the phone in his hand. The last few days had been a blur of decisions, meetings, and conversations he never thought he would have. He had promised Emily that he would be there for their son, but the reality of it all still felt distant, like a story that wasn't his. His phone buzzed in his hand, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, his assistant. "Nathan, I need you in the office. There's an urgent matter with the Henderson project." Nathan hesitated, staring at the message. Work. It was always work. It had been his life for so long that it had become a reflex to dive into it whenever things got complicated. He was good at work. He knew how to control it, manage it. But this, being a father, being there for a child, that was something he had never prepared for. He took a deep breath and typed back to Sarah. "I'll be there in an hour." He put the phone down, starting the engine and pulling out of the parking lot. The drive to the office was quiet, but his mind raced. He thought about the baby, about Emily, and about what kind of father he could be. He had promised her he would try, but trying wasn't enough. He needed to be something more. When he arrived at the office, the usual chaos greeted him. Sarah was waiting for him in the lobby, her expression tense. "We need to act fast, Nathan," she said as they walked to his office. "The Henderson deal is falling apart, and we need to find a solution now." Nathan nodded, his mind still on the baby. "I know. Let's fix this." He threw himself into work, the hours slipping away as he dived into meetings, phone calls, and decisions that felt more familiar than the strange new reality of fatherhood. But even as he worked, his mind kept drifting back to the child. Every decision he made now felt weighted with the knowledge that he was shaping not only his future, but his son's. By the time he left the office that night, the world outside seemed different. The bright lights of the city no longer felt like a world he belonged to. He was still Nathan Reed, the billionaire CEO, but something had shifted inside him. He pulled into his parking spot at home and sat there for a moment, looking out at the city skyline. He thought about the baby, about Emily. It was time to go home, to face the new life he had promised to be a part of. When he walked into Emily's apartment later that night, she was sitting on the couch, a soft light casting shadows around the room. The baby was asleep in his crib, a peaceful silence filling the air. "You okay?" she asked as he sat down next to her. Nathan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm trying to figure it out," he said quietly. Emily gave him a small smile. "You don't have to figure it all out today. Just take it one step at a time." Nathan nodded, his heart heavy but full of something he hadn't expected. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. Nathan sat on the edge of the couch, his hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor. The weight of the decision he had made was beginning to sink in. He had promised Emily that he would be there for their son, but the reality of fatherhood still felt foreign to him. He had spent his entire life focused on his career, building an empire, making deals, and making sure everything around him ran smoothly. But this was different. A life, a child, depended on him now. He glanced over at Emily, who was sitting across from him, her arms wrapped around herself. The silence between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. "How do you do it?" Nathan finally asked, his voice quiet. Emily looked at him, her eyes soft. "How do I do what?" she replied, her tone gentle. Nathan shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "How do you manage all of this? I'm struggling just to keep up, and you've been doing it alone." Emily's lips curled into a small, understanding smile. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "I just had to keep going. You learn to adjust, to do what needs to be done. You take it one day at a time." Nathan let out a breath, leaning back against the couch. "I don't know if I'm cut out for this," he admitted, his voice laced with doubt. "I've always been the guy who fixes problems, who makes the hard decisions. But this feels different. I can't just throw money at it or delegate." Emily watched him for a long moment, and for the first time, Nathan saw the depth of her own struggles reflected in her gaze. "No one's asking you to be perfect," she said softly. "I didn't expect you to know what to do. But just being here, just showing up, that's what matters. That's all he needs." Nathan looked at the baby, who was sleeping soundly in his crib. The soft rise and fall of his tiny chest was a reminder of just how fragile life could be. "I want to be a good father," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to do this right." Emily nodded, her expression warm but firm. "You will. You just have to take it one step at a time. It's not about being perfect. It's about being there, about showing up when it counts." Nathan let her words settle in, the truth of them ringing clear in his mind. He didn't need to have all the answers right now. He didn't need to know everything. He just needed to be there, to do the best he could for the child that was now his responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. He looked at Emily, his eyes meeting hers with a new sense of determination. "Okay," he said, nodding slowly. "One step at a time." Nathan woke up early the next morning, the sun just beginning to rise as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The events of the past week had completely turned his world upside down. He had made a promise to Emily, to their son, that he would be there, but each day felt like a new challenge. He had spent years building his career, focused solely on business, but now he was responsible for another life, one that depended on him in ways he hadn't fully understood until now. He got up and went through his usual routine, but this time, his thoughts kept drifting back to the baby. He couldn't deny the reality of it anymore. This child, his son, was part of him now. And with that realization came the weight of what it meant to be a father. As he dressed and prepared for the day ahead, Nathan found himself questioning whether he was ready for it. He had never asked for this, never expected it, and yet here he was, facing the hardest challenge of his life. He needed to make sure that he could do this, not just for Emily, but for himself, too. After getting ready, he grabbed his phone and sent Emily a quick text. "I'll be over later to help with the baby," it read. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The moment he stepped out the door, the world outside seemed just as overwhelming as it had the night before. He had a meeting scheduled with his team, but his mind was elsewhere. As he walked through the office, his thoughts remained on his son. He was trying to do the right thing, but it wasn't easy. During the meeting, Nathan found himself zoning out, his focus slipping every time his mind wandered back to the baby. It wasn't until his assistant Sarah interrupted his thoughts that he snapped back to reality. "Nathan, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. Nathan paused, taking a deep breath before answering. "Yeah, just a lot on my plate right now," he replied, trying to brush it off. But Sarah didn't let it go. "You've been distracted for days. If you need to talk about something, you know you can always come to me, right?" Nathan nodded, grateful for her support, but he wasn't ready to talk about it just yet. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. By the time evening arrived, Nathan was more exhausted than he'd ever been, but the weight of his new reality still loomed over him. He made his way to Emily's apartment, unsure of what to expect. When he knocked, Emily opened the door with a soft smile. "Hey, you made it," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Nathan gave her a small nod, then glanced over at the baby, who was peacefully sleeping in his crib. He walked over slowly, his heart heavy with the responsibility now resting on his shoulders. As he stood there, watching the baby, he realized that he was no longer just Nathan Reed, the CEO. He was a father now, and that meant everything was about to change.